What are you doing?
Hey, actually, I've been feeling a bit under the weather lately, so I'm taking antibiotics.
Oh no, that sounds tough. But, colds are mostly caused by viruses. Do antibiotics really work against viruses?
I'm not really sure about the details. What's the difference between bacteria and viruses anyway?
That's an interesting question. Shall we explore it together?
Yeah, the adventure of knowledge begins.
First, bacteria and viruses actually have completely different sizes.
They're both microscopic worlds, right?
That's right. To us, they both appear small. But in reality, their sizes are astonishingly different. Take a look at this image.
This is human hair.
Correct. The thickness of a hair strand is about 0.1 millimeters.
I see.
Shall we zoom in more?
Oh, I see something interesting.
Those are human cells. They measure between 0.1 and 0.2 millimeters.
Smaller than a hair? Huh?
Let's zoom in even further.
What is this?
These are bacteria. They are usually about 0.1 to 0.1 millimeters in size.
And compared to that, what about viruses?
Look, they're right here.
Huh? That? It's so small. I didn't even notice.
Viruses are about 0.1 to 0.1 micrometers. That's about 1/10 to 1,000th the size of bacteria.
So viruses are really small, huh?
Exactly. The size difference between bacteria and viruses is about the same as the difference between a human and a grain of sand.
That's surprising.
This difference in size is actually very important. It affects how they reproduce.
How do we pass on our genes?
It's the cycle of life. We and other living organisms continue the existence of life by having children and descendants.
Yeah, I understand that.
Bacteria and viruses also do the same thing by creating copies of themselves and multiplying.
I've heard about that.
But the way copies are made, the methods of reproduction are different between bacteria and viruses.
How are they specifically different?
For reproduction, you need a blueprint and tools to carry out the process. The blueprint refers to DNA or RNA, and the tools refer to enzymes and ribosomes.
So you need both a blueprint and tools, two things.
Yes, both bacteria and viruses, as well as our cells, require these two things. Let's take a closer look at bacterial reproduction. Here's a model that shows the structure of bacteria.
Hey, didn't you mention before that the blueprint and engineer were included separately?
Yes, initially the engineer is formed based on the blueprint. Then an enzyme called DNA polymerase copies the blueprint.
So the blueprint has multiplied.
That's right, and eventually a protective wall is formed around the blueprint.
I see. So that's why the bacteria split into two. Each one has one blueprint and one engineer. They're perfectly replicating the original bacteria.
Perfect. After that, each one will start functioning as an independent bacterium.
Yeah, it looks like a complete replication.
That's right. This is how bacteria replicate. Now, let's take a closer look at how viruses reproduce. Do you remember that viruses are much smaller than bacteria?
Yeah, was it like comparing a person to a grain of pepper?
Correct. But you see, because of their small size, viruses don't have enough space to accommodate technicians inside. However, they do have a blueprint.
Really?
Yes, for example, the size of the technicians that make proteins, called ribosomes, is about 15 to 30 nanometers. Compared to the size of viruses, it's difficult to fit technicians inside.
So, how do they multiply? Without technicians, the work can't progress, right?
Exactly. That's why viruses acquire technicians from the outside.
Where does it enter from?
Well, viruses actually hijack our cells.
Can they really do that?
Let's take a closer look with this model. This is a model of human cells.
So even inside this cell, there are blueprints and engineers, huh?
Yeah, so the virus enters these cells and injects its own blueprint.
That's efficient.
And our cell engineers unknowingly replicate the blueprint of the virus.
So they're being deceived.
Exactly. And the multiplied viruses destroy the cells and are released outside. And most of the time, the destroyed cells end up dead.
That's a clever way, isn't it? Viruses are really cunning in their calculations.
Exactly. Now, let's take a look at the difference in treatment methods between bacteria and viruses, understanding this difference.
Do antibiotics work on viruses?
Actually, antibiotics mainly act on bacteria.
So they work on bacteria, but not on viruses. right?
Correct. Antibiotics interrupt processes such as bacterial cell wall formation, preventing bacteria from reproducing.
So that's the strategy.
Penicillin is a good example. It inhibits bacterial cell wall formation, rendering the
Wow, that's amazing.
However, antibiotics don't work on viruses because viruses utilize human cells.
Why don't vaccines work against viruses?
Viruses use our own cells to replicate. So if we stop that process, it could potentially harm our own cells too.
Using cells like that is pretty clever, huh?
Treating viruses requires a special approach. There are treatments that specifically target certain viruses.
Viruses can be quite tricky opponents, huh?
So let's review today's topic together.
Okay.
Bacteria use their own mechanisms to multiply, but viruses use human cells to replicate.
Yeah, and antibiotics are effective against bacteria, but they don't work against viruses.
Exactly!
It's amazing that we can learn such interesting things. I want to learn more next time too.
On our channel, we explain topics like this in an easy-to-understand way.
And don't forget to subscribe and like the video. We're also looking forward to your comments. See you next time.